Welcome to Faith Works Live. Here's your host, Rebecca Haynie.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood here in the fine state of Iowa. I'm so excited to get to talk with fascinating people. It's not all politics all the time, although this week it kind of feels like it. But we have to deal with the biggest questions I think that I have ever faced. Been on record saying I didn't realize that the fight over whether or not men and women are different would be the question of our time, and that would somehow forget basic biology that's been working for us for the last several millennia. And yet here we are. So while we may not have expected that this is the hill that we need to die on, here we are, and it's best to be prepared. So if you're new here, hi, I'm Rebecca Haynie. I have controversial opinions like men and women are different, and that is a good thing, and that we were created by God to uniquely and wonderfully display his image to the world. But what does that look like? That in itself, just that statement, is so radically different from the rest of the world. That makes me radical, probably eminently cancelable. We need those strong voices, especially strong women. But the world also associates strong women with, I would say, the lies of feminism. That's another controversial opinion I have. Feminism is a lie, and has actually harmed an awful lot of women. And I don't think that this is a unique idea anymore. I think there are a lot of women that are actually speaking out, but we're looking at surveying the wreckage of our culture and thinking, if we're supposed to be so free and so empowered, why are we so miserable? What has happened here? And why can we now not even define what a woman is, let alone empower them? What on earth has gone wrong? Well, one brave, intrepid woman has gone and done the research, has dug back through the annals of history to examine the claims of feminism, the origins of feminism. How did we get here? What has happened? And she details it all in her new book called The End of Woman. And the subtitle in and of itself is ear-catching: How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. Dr. Carrie Gress is our special guest. We're honored to have her with us. Carrie, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on today, Rebecca.
You are an amazing lady. You're a mom of 5, and you are a researcher, you're a writer, and I applaud you first and foremost as a fellow mama bear for finding the time to do all of this, but in particular for tackling some of those sacred cows of our society. I mean, you know, I'm sure better than most, that these are issues that no woman is supposed to talk about. There's this ridiculous consensus that we're all supposed to pretend like feminism has been great for society, and that we're supposed to perpetuate these lies on the next generation of girls. I, for one, refuse to do it. But I didn't have the depth of information that you have in your book. I think I had an inkling about some of it, but you reveal so much about the origins of feminism too. Is that what provoked you to write this book?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. This is my 10th book. So I had already done some other work on the feminist question, especially second wave feminism. And I wanted to write a secular book and really lay it out just for a general audience. And so I thought, I haven't done first wave feminism. Let me just go back and look, see what's there. I'm sure it's just lovely, platitudes about how great women are and, just nice things about women.
Who doesn't like a good platitude?
Exactly. There have to be plenty from the suffragettes, right? Anyway, I was amazed and blown away when I started digging into it and just thought, wow, why don't we know this? Why have I never heard this? Someone who's spent a lot of time looking at feminism, we always hear there was this radical shift that happened in second wave. And of course there was, but it wasn't as dramatic as people think. And so I think it was all of these things kind of coming to a head, seeing the unhappiness of women, seeing the chokehold that the culture has on women and the way that we think about ourselves as women. And then just that big question, why can we not answer what a woman is? So all of those things really led me to just think this needs to be written. We need to figure out and help people understand how we've gotten to this point, that the trans movement didn't happen overnight, but it really has been brewing for almost 2 centuries now.
Okay. Well, and maybe we can work backwards in that sense, because I think that is so shocking to a lot of folks that are watching things like, the canceling of J.K. Rowling, for example, pretty prominent example. We're looking at women in sports being physically harmed by men playing their sports and claiming that they're women, and then the entire culture essentially victim blaming the female athletes and saying, well, if you have a problem with undressing in front of a biological man, then you need counseling. Then you're the one that needs to shut up and sit down. Basically, 99% of all the women are the ones with the problem, and the 1%, they're the real victims here. So they're the only ones that get rights and protection, which is utterly ludicrous when you stop and think about it. And yet here we are, and it's the people that should be crying the loudest to protect women because they're feminists that now can no longer define what a woman even is, because it does sort of feel like this giant shift as though, what on earth happened here? How do we have a woman celebrated for being the first Black woman on the Supreme Court, and now she can't even define what a woman is because she's not a biologist? It's just the height of professing to be wise. We've become fools over here. But you're saying it's not really that big a shift if you understand where the roots of feminism lie. And I wonder if we could make that connection, please.
Sure. Yeah, I think the best and most succinct way to really describe it for people is to see that feminism, at its heart tries to help women, and it has very good intentions. And obviously women have been damaged and have suffered significantly throughout history. I'm not trying to in any way belittle anyone's pain, and none of these women are either. But I think what happened was that they saw women suffering and thought it's because they're women. They're vulnerable because of their fertility. They're vulnerable because of their size and all of this. So the question became in their minds, how do we help women become more like men? And this is what started early in the first wave, like 1800s. That's the question that they were asking, even sooner than that, actually. And just kept moving forward with the movement. And then certainly you add on pieces that sort of get rid of our fertility altogether. And suddenly there's this idealization of the masculine. I mean, this has been going on for a long time, but it just got a lot worse because women, especially through abortion, were able to actually not have to bear children. And so that changed things dramatically. So suddenly everything that women are doing is in competition or tension with the masculine, and the things that women actually have always done, something as simple as homemaking. We can go into this a little bit, but Betty Friedan was just absolutely adamant at making it clear that that was a comfortable concentration camp, and, making it clear that this was just unacceptable. And so it's amazing to see, even in the culture now, all the things that are, part of homemaking have come back into popularity, except for the name homemaking. Like, you still can't call yourself a homemaker. People just don't accept that as something even valid or, in any way having any sort of significance. So, yeah, when you see that this is the question they're asking, how do we make women more like men? It makes perfect sense that we would get to this point where literally we have the technology to, obviously not completely, but try to make women more like men biologically. This, is really part of the feminist movement back in the 1970s, was this idea of getting rid of genders altogether. There was this very schizophrenic movement because on the one hand, they want to be like men, but on the other, there's this privileging of the lesbian relationship, and they saw that as like the highest good. There were all these strains of like getting rid of men altogether. So it's just this very bizarre relationship that's been created. We want to be like men. We hate men, but we want men to become more like us. It's just muddle. So yeah, it all kind of comes under that one umbrella of making women a lot more like men and vice versa. So it's a culmination of that effort that's been, underway for centuries now.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think understanding some of the very poignant stories, the tragic stories that many women in the past have experienced. I understand. I've done a lot of research on Margaret Sanger because life is a passion of mine. And I know that part of the reason that she developed essentially this battle against female fertility and saw that as the enemy, as well as, the entirety of the human race needing to be purified and down to the race of thoroughbreds. And so there's this whole weird, like, eugenics Ubermensch strain, but based on her own experience of her mother, for example, having many, many children, and that they couldn't afford to have all these children was the idea, and that she saw her mother as having this miserable, horrible life and died too early and all of these things. And so hearing stories like that, I can understand why people say, well, women need empowerment. Women need feminism. I would like you to fact check, if you would. Women couldn't own property. Women were considered basically slaves because they didn't have their own agency. They didn't have their vote. They didn't have their voice. They couldn't be educated. Are those things true? And is that the real motivation behind this call for feminine equality? Or are there some other less altruistic motivations at play?
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating question because you find all of these different pockets where more women were getting degrees in something like the 1890s than they were in the 1830s or something like that, or 1930s rather. So there's these pockets and this give and take and different surges and stops, but these are all sort of like natural law kinds of questions. These are things that people could have sorted out without feminism being the one to sort it, where we actually like threw literally the baby out with the bathwater, where we had to sort of turn culture upside down entirely to achieve these things. And I think that's just one of the ways in which, women are controlled by this guilt that is put upon us. I know I've been told even recently, how dare you question feminism when you have an advanced degree and you work outside the home and, on and on. I don't think that it was something magical about feminism that gave us these opportunities, but I think that they've come together. And so as a result, people associate them. But what's also come with feminism are three major things. There's 3 points that I think kind of define the movement from the very beginning. The first one is this connection with free love, getting rid of monogamy, getting rid of marriage altogether, allowing women to have relationships the way that men do, seemingly. This was a very important thing, but even back in the early 1800s, and I think we don't think of the 1800s at all. We think of a very Victorian ideas and very much more pure and pristine sort of era, and it just wasn't. These were a lot of the ideas that were swirling around. So that was one of them. One characteristic that we see coming through all the way up to present day. The second one is the occult. The occult was just an amazing force behind all of this. Percy Shelley was the first who's in terms of really articulating the movement of feminism. He took the ideas from his mother-in-law, Mary Wollstonecraft, who was considered the godmother of feminism, and he just kind of congealed it into what he called the women's revolution. So he was very committed to free love. He was also very committed to the occult. And then he was finally, the third piece, which we see running again up through today, is this idea of smashing the patriarchy, which is that restructuring of society so that there's no hierarchy of any sort. There's not military, there's no hierarchy in the church, there's not men at the head of the household, anything resembling that. It's just this flattening, very almost communist before communism kind of ideas, like the seeds thereof. So those are really the 3 elements. And then you see it mapping on in the 1900s to communism. Initially the 2 groups were at odds with each other. And then they finally realized, like, wait a minute, we want the same things more or less. You guys just are interested in the occult and we like atheism. But that was really what allowed it to take off. And it's one of the things I found most interesting in the 1900s was there was almost this switch that was flipped, where you didn't hear any more about the tenderness that a mother feels towards her child after that point. All the rhetoric changed to the word drudgery. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I ran across the word drudgery of motherhood. And so that's another piece of it. But all the while, and you alluded to this already, is Margaret Sanger, all of these women who were involved all had just these incredibly heartrending lives, that you're just going, no wonder you're bitter and angry and wanted to see change. But the kinds of change that you're recommending is actually only, adding fuel to the fire of this instead of actually bringing healing to you and other women. It's actually just broken women breaking more women. The first part of my book is called The Lost Girls, because I just go through all these women and their lives and the brokenness that they lived through that then ended up getting us to this point where in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, we've got still all those 3 things again: the free love, the smash, what became smashing the patriarchy, and the occult still very much alive and well within the feminist movement.
Well, and I definitely want to get to some of the more spiritual elements of that. And I think that is an important element, especially when we're talking about cultural level, generational level deception and lies. We know where that comes from and we know what the fruit of that will be. So it's no wonder that we're depressed and miserable and purposeless and envious. And I think I'd like to park there for a minute, because one of the things that you mention is this idea of women, in some sense, hating men, but also wanting to be men and becoming more masculine. And now we've reached the most ludicrous levels where we now can no longer even define what a woman is, which is apparently one of the major goals of feminism, because again, we're eradicating gender. If women are the losers in the gender game, if women are always the weaker sex, so to speak, then why not just blow up sex anyway? Why not just make us gender A and gender B? But I don't think that you can say that while at the same time claiming that women are awesome and wonderful and valuable, which feminism also purports to do. Can you help me make sense of where that contradiction comes from? But also, I think the roots of bitterness and the roots of envy that are underneath this will be revealed if you spend any time in conversation with militant feminists. Envy is a very apt description. And I wonder if we could unpack that a little bit.
Well, I think there's a lot in that question. One of the things, envy is just such a huge player. There's this incredible book called Warriors versus Worriers, and I think Oxford University Press published it. Joyce Beresford or Benesford, I can't remember her last name off the top of my head, but she wrote it. And I've gone back to this book over and over again because it really talks about, with women, the role of envy and why it's such a volatile, deep-seated piece. And even this idea of victimhood, how so effective. I mean, this is why Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, was so trenchant, why she sold 3 million copies of that book within the first few years of its publication, because she really hit on this idea of women are victims. And this book, Warriors versus Worriers, actually talks a lot about how, because women are physically not as capable, but we also have children, it's when you have a child, this is a very long-term commitment to raising that child. Because of those perceived vulnerabilities, women use and operate and function differently because they're trying to find advantages for themselves or their children. And it's actually one of the most fascinating books. I'd recommend it to anyone who's interested in this topic to just go through that book and start seeing kind of these patterns that she extracts out of it. And the reason why envy is such a strong motivator for us, because of this perception of our own weakness that we're always trying to sort of get ahead in these different ways. One of the best parts about it is it's never done like, elbowing. It's always with a smile. When there's more tension between women, the smile gets bigger, and, all these different ways in which women sort of get at each other. So I think that the victim piece has been so successful. It's made it so easy for that to just be played out over and over and over again. Obviously, the idea comes from Marx, and he used it for class struggle, that it was the overlords versus the proletariat. Engels is the one actually who articulated this idea of patriarchy in sort of a pejorative way. He still meant it in a class division. But then you've got these new thinkers like Wilhelm Reich, who comes along in the 1930s and writes this book called The Sexual Revolution. And they saw that they weren't going to be able to create this Marxist utopia unless they changed the culture. You couldn't just rely upon the classes anymore. You had to change the culture. And so Herbert Marcuse is another one that was very involved in this, and they influenced women like Kate Millett and Angela Davis. And these women are the ones that went full bore in terms of just this idea of that men are the oppressors, women are the victims. And, we see this with critical race theory playing itself out, where it then becomes, associated with the differences between sexes and the differences between races, and then the differences between sexual identities or orientations. That's what really exploded it. But because it was so effective, Betty Friedan really put her finger on something in 1963 when she's writing about this victimhood of women. And the victimhood at its heart is, I'm missing out on something. Other people have something that I want. And, what does it go back to? It goes all the way back to Eve. What does the serpent tempt her with? You can be like God. I'm missing out on something.
Yeah, God's holding out on you.
God is holding out. And that's, I want something that I do not have. And so that's just a deep emotional weak spot that women have. And feminism has absolutely played every chord and made it so hard for us to sort of even see through it, because it just sort of fits in with our natural resentments and things that we want is a weakness of us to feel bad about, instead of gratitude or, seeing our lives in a totally different light of what we have already. So yeah, I think that is such a major piece. If we could sort of get past the envy, and which of course leads to resentment, that, the whole world could change overnight if that was the one piece we could really remove and transform quickly.
If only we could transform that. If only we could be one. If only there weren't these voices that seek to divide us over and over again. I hear there's profit in that. Surely no one would seek to divide us for profit.
No one would do that. No one would want it. Right.
Dr.
Yeah.
Carrie Gress is our special guest. We are honored to have her on our airwaves. Check out her brand new book. It's not her first, but it may be her best. We'll just see. I haven't read any of your others, although I'm fascinated by theology of home. I think that is something that is receiving renewed interest that it should. But we're talking today about the end of woman, how smashing the patriarchy has destroyed us. And I have a couple more questions for Carrie when we return. I think there is some feminist pushback. I wonder what the best arguments are on the other side, and then how we can wrestle with those and confront those, and how we can perhaps become better by working together. I don't know. Maybe that's a pipe dream and I'm Pollyanna over here, but we'll see what Carrie thinks about that when we return. You're listening to Faith Works Live. In today's world, security has never been more vital. And at FaithWorks Live, we're proud to partner with VeriGuard Security. It's a professional physical security service, and they're really raising the bar in security and private investigations. Whether you need a team of professional officers to protect what you have worked hard to build, or their mobile security units for multiple properties or large locations, from business or corporate properties to your home or neighborhood. Perhaps you've got an event coming up. They secure quality security coverage for events large and small, because it's about peace of mind and protecting you, your family, your team, and your property. Settle for nothing less than the best when it comes to your security. You shouldn't have to compromise. When it comes to security, you can trust VeriGuard. Contact them today at veriguard.us. That's VARA guard.us. For security service, you can trust VeriGuard. So glad you're with us. Faith Works Live is the name of the show. I'm glad I'm here after having cancelable conversations, because I say feminism is a lie. Men and women are different. God made us that way, and it's a good thing. But we're learning about The End of Woman, a new book, fascinating new book by Carrie Gress, how smashing the patriarchy has destroyed us. You pull no punches, Carrie, in your title. And I think there more power to you for all of that. I think we've been silent for too long. I've long thought that when we see the ridiculousness about, for example, female athletes that get concussions because they allowed a man to play in the game with them, why aren't the women standing up? Why aren't the men either, for that matter? But why aren't the women standing up and calling out how ridiculous this is? I don't know if we're just too scared, if we've been brainwashed, and I'm sure some combination of lots of those different factors. We also see it in the hypersexuality that is all around us, the inculcated gender confusion that's happening in our classrooms all across the nation. It is high time that we stand up. I am proud to see moms and dads standing up for their kids now, but it feels like we're fighting back against an avalanche. Like we're just at the mercy of this long and concerted and intentional effort to basically destroy the very foundations of everything that makes us human. And you say, yep, that's about the size of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it is amazing, because if you look around, I mean, this is one of the startling things that I discovered in the last book that I wrote on women, called Anti-Mary Exposed: Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity, which actually got canceled because of that title. Toxic femininity is not something that you're allowed to put on Facebook or Instagram Marketplace. But the big issue for me is to just look around and see that we have, as Christians, we haven't offered an alternative way for people to really see an option. I call it an off-ramp off of what the culture has been providing. I mean, women especially need to have like a great mom or a sister or someone in their life who has showed them how to be a good mom. But otherwise, it's very hard to find. It's incredibly hard to, if you're in any way looking at pop culture, pop music, Hollywood, fashion industry, politics, book publishing, all of these things are very much spouting the exact same mantra, which is this idea that we can change human nature into whatever it is that we want to. And, the interest du jour is to make men into fake women. So that piece keeps changing, but the underlying, I think you articulated it well, is it feels like this avalanche, but it's an avalanche going nowhere. I mean, this is really a destructive cause that doesn't actually have a real goal. And this is what we've seen over and over again in Marxism forever, is there's not a building aspect to it. You cannot build with resentment. You cannot build something with anger and rage. All you can do is tear down. And so that's what we're really living through. And, it's no surprise when you look at a place like San Francisco to see the disaster that's being created there. That's what the goal. That's what the bed that they're making is what we're seeing in California and especially San Francisco. So it's really daunting when you realize, like, that's the fruit. That's what we're going to get if we keep going down this path, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just to push back from the other side, I'm trying to maybe steel man. I like that phrase, to steel man versus straw man, the other side, because I think there are well-intentioned and thoughtful women that would claim the title feminist, although statistically fewer now than ever before. And they would say, I believe in empowering women. Many of them would stand up against maybe J.K. Rowling being a good example, whether intellectual or not. At least she's trying to stand up for the truth of womanhood, which I applaud her for. But there have been some, have there not been abuses against women by, whether you call it the patriarchy or male dominance in society, or is that in itself a fallacy? Is there historical evidence for this idea of patriarchy, and are the feminists then justified in pushing back against that, or at least diagnosing that problem? And if not, is that just a whole nother fairy tale?
Yeah. I know. I think it's great to do this. I'm a huge with a PhD in philosophy. I think you absolutely need to get your best arguments from the other side and then work with that. The problem with the patriarchy piece is that, again, it's sort of institutionalizing men and categorizing all of them into this oppressor role, when we know that that's not how things function. We know that there are individuals who make really bad decisions on both male and female, and that's really where we need to pin the blame, instead of just saying it's all men and it's because of this structure that it's institutionalized. Like, no, that's not really the problem. The problem isn't in the institution itself. The problem is in articulation of it. And it's, you can see, actually, this is the amazing part, is just to see how much this is really all about power. The Barbie movie was such an amazing example of this, where you see.
Let's talk about it. I haven't seen it, but it sparked. Okay. It was the film that sparked 1,000 think pieces.
Yeah. Well, I think and the film is just classic. It's sort of saying the feminists are aging out. We need to find younger blood, and let's do that with a lot of pink and a few touching moments and some nostalgia with all the Barbie pieces. But it's over and over again. It makes it clear there's not a necessary man on the whole movie, and that's part of the mantra, is that men are really useless, and this is really how they view the patriarchy. This is how they view husbands. Maybe insemination is probably the only thing that they really value and see is important, but the rest of it could sort of just be gone. And you have women saying as much, publicly, even more recently. I think then the other side of that is, Ken and his friends, when they get a hold of a little bit of power, they just make a mess of Barbie land, and the women have to trick them back into, behaving, and then suddenly everything's peaceful again. There's just this myth that women make things peaceful and everything would be okay if we just had more women in charge. All of that is really the part of the myth that they're expecting us to believe. So, I think that there's all kinds of problems. Again, there's no way you can say that women haven't been damaged, women haven't been hurt. That's not really the fundamental point. What they're trying to do is basically make men submit. I mean, this is what you see in the Barbie film, is Ken and his friends just have to submit. They're trying to flip on their heads what they think men were doing to women, instead of what is the complementarity between men and women? What are the gifts that men bring to the table? None of those things are really discussed. It's all in the movie or in the movement. And I think that's obviously a huge problem when you've, again, are trying to write off and silence a whole half of the population. Then that's really the heart of the issue.
Mm-hmm. Right. I would agree. And I think the adding in the fertility piece and obviously the lies of Planned Parenthood, and we referenced Margaret Sanger, but I think going full bore into that's a huge wing of why feminism has been both effective and destructive to this existential level now, where we're talking about women essentially hating their own children. and women taught to believe that their fertility, which is one of their most unique and precious aspect of our femininity, there's nothing more womanly than bearing children, and there's nothing more essential about women and men as well. We can't do it alone, much to the feminist chagrin. We cannot do that. But now we're hating even that most glorious virtue that is so necessary, even just for the continuation of the species, and we're so psychologically torn about that. And that is, I weep for my society, and even for myself. I was always pro-life, but just I've been a career gal for a long time before, and I thought, okay, this is how I'm going to serve. This is what my life is going to be. And then I got married maybe a little bit later than some, but it's at 30 is consistent for my generation now. Wonderful guy, and we have 6 kiddos in our family, and it is wonderful. But it caused me to rethink a lot of lies that I had myself believed about where my worth was as a human being, and making decisions about, do I pursue education? Do I pursue, is it wrong for me to put my kids in daycare while I go back to my full-time job? Even if I believe that I'm on mission for all these things, there's a lot of women, and I mean a lot of Christian women, that are very conflicted about the fallout of all of these lies that we've been steeping in for so long, that we don't realize that we've imbibed them and that we've believed them to be true. And as you mentioned, I don't know that the church has done a great job of providing alternatives. Some have, and there have been those quiet heroes, those moms and grandmothers in the background that are just living the lives that we all can seek to emulate. Maybe we didn't appreciate at the time, but we can see them shimmering like in the dimness, like the jewel that they are. We can appreciate them now, and we need to go to them for wisdom. But I don't know that there have been a lot of public voices or a concerted effort to really train up women in an alternative way that glorifies their femininity, in contrast to the girl boss lies that they have seen.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you're absolutely right about just what is missing. I mean, we just don't even have kind of the mental hooks to really say, what's my moral imagination about what comes to mind when I think of a woman, a mother, and all those details. We know, and this has been where the left has been so effective as well, is they've been able to not only define their position, but they've also been able to make what they view as the opposition look like either doormats or the Handmaid's Tale women they trout out every time they're upset about something, trying to make us look like we're somehow involved in a fertility cult. But the bigger issue is fundamentally what the feminism has done. I mean, it's an amazing thing, is break that tight, tender bond between mother and child that throughout all of history. That's not to say that women didn't have abortions, but it is to say never, ever, ever at the numbers that we see now. I think there are more abortions in the world that happen than people dying from every other thing combined. So this, I think Guttmacher Institute said that 2022, something like 73 million abortions. Well, there were only about 65 million people that died from every other thing together. So we're actually having more abortions than people are dying of anything. So if you even look at those numbers, year after year after year, this dwarfs any kind of destruction from any tyrant throughout history. Yeah. And it's horrifying all the more because it's mother and child. It's that relationship, and obviously a lot of women are coerced or confused and led into it in ways that, we're not passing judgment on. But I think we have to say, when you see that kind of massive destruction to the human heart and to the woman and to new life, a culture cannot withstand very much. And we know this. We know what kills cultures. And this is definitely not something that's helping our cause. Is that breaking of the human heart, especially the mother's tender, loving heart. That's it's a tremendous tragedy.
It's a war on our own children. Think about it. And I don't think we can't withstand that cognitive dissonance on a cultural level for long. I think we're seeing the implications of that right now. A quick excerpt from your book, which again is called The End of Woman: How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us, is what we are living through boils down to something shockingly simple. Where feminism has taken the place of religion, the queen bees are the stand-in for the clergy, preaching the gospel of discontent, narcissism, self, worship and the human self-worship and the human sacrifice. It has become the cool religion where the elites and celebrities worship and are worshipped. And I think that leads me into some of my questions about the spiritual aspects of this and the implications of this. It's easy to see now, maybe easier now than ever before. And I've been doing this whole, cultural commentary broadcast thing for the last couple decades. And it used to be that we would say ridiculous things like people aren't even going to be able to tell whether we're men or women anymore. We won't even be able to define what a woman is. And folks would laugh. That was satire way back when. And now it's just a given. And it does seem like this has happened again overnight. But for those of us who have been watching, and I know you have as well, this has all been in terms of religion. This has all presented itself as new neo-paganism in some aspects. You mentioned the strings to the occult in feminism's past. And I wonder if you could give some of those details that you found through your research of the spiritual aspects of feminism and where some of those, and I say outright lies, where some of those lies have come from and taken root, and why it does have this new religion now. We're talking about an actual priesthood, essentially, of people that are administering this religion. And we see it in the people that fall away, the people that are excommunicated, that are canceled, that cannot speak up, that cannot speak freely, the things you're not allowed to say, the people you're not allowed to criticize. Again, it's all about power, but it is inherently religious in its nature. And I find that so fascinating and insidious all at the same time. And I wonder if you could share some of those aspects with us.
Yeah. No, actually, absolutely. I have this, the second to last chapter of my book really talks about this idea of the world's second oldest religion, this worship of the human, of the self, of the satanic, of human nature, wanting to change it, all of that. But yeah, I think one of the areas that was most stark and interesting was definitely in Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. They were very much involved in the Second Great Awakening of the United States. And the Great Awakening, there was a lot of revivals happening, but there were also all kinds of mediums and seances. This is like a crazy time. Civil War had just ended. You've got new technology like the telegraph and things like that people are being able to connect in material ways, like natural ways on the planet that no one could imagine before. But you also have a lot of children dying very young ages and very, very quickly from things like cholera. And you also have all these men that died in the war too. So people are broken and they want to connect with those who are dead. And it was just something that really was taken advantage of. And so these spirit tables were developed to work with the other side, that there was these knockings that happened on the tables that sort of helped people figure out what the spirit world was communicating. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton used one of these spirit tables, actually, and that's where she got the idea for the Seneca Falls Convention. This table is actually in the Smithsonian now. I think it's still called the spirit table, but people don't really know that it was because of a seance that she got these ideas. And so that it's these kinds of ideas that happen. She also wrote this commentary called The Woman's Bible. She was raised a Calvinist, but abandoned her Christian faith and was very involved in trying to get rid of Christianity. And she wrote this thing called the Women's Bible. You can still buy it now, but it's embarrassingly bad and juvenile. Like, it feels like just a teenager sort of railing against, anyway, it's just silly. Anytime a woman is brought up in scripture, they bring it up and have to say something about it. But she's also involved in this group called Theosophy, which is, is a religion sort of muddled together by this Russian noblewoman who traveled the world, and it had all these occult pieces in it. So, this is just to give you an idea. The book obviously goes much deeper in this, but the reality is even far surpassed what I could even put in the chapter of the book. But so much dabbling in it. And it was interesting to see even that the Theosophy idea, Gloria Steinem's mom was actually involved in Theosophy, 60 years later, 70 years later, whatever the time period was. So it's amazing to see how there were these cycles, and you can just see these patterns over and over again of women's dabbling in the same kinds of things. So yeah, it was very much played. The occult very much played a role in it. And, you get to that also back in the 1970s with women, someone like Kate Millett, who, had no problem dabbling in the occult. Her sister, Mallory Millett, has been talking a lot about Kate's life. And, she tells a story about 12 women sitting around a table naked, that with just knives and bowls, and there's a snake on the table. It was Halloween, I think, and Mallory had the good sense to just get out of there. But it's these kinds of things that the number 12 is not accidental. I mean, Kate Millett was brought up as a Catholic, and she knew what those numbers suggested. So yeah, there's all kinds of elements that, you could write a whole book just on that, but I didn't want this book to just be focused on that. I think the sensational can, sometimes be overwhelming and off-putting, when there are just really these consistent ideas that have taken hold, part and parcel to the occult, but not just because of the occult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that it's true that the human heart is always looking for meaning, purpose, looking for those answers to the big questions. And if you find yourself in particular disappointed, dissatisfied, or rebelling against this established religion, which typically in the Western world has been Christianity, and it seems like it is patriarchal in nature. And now we see a lot of people, I would say, departing from Christianity or trying to reinvent it, but yet still, cling to the vestiges and sometimes the literal vestments of Christianity to have that sense of authority and to carry the name of Christ into this, but then using that to justify not only feminism, but also now things like abortion, where you have women, so-called pastors or preachers, that are out there glorifying abortion and talking about just the most heinous sins, and saying and putting the stamp of approval on it in the name, falsely in the name of Christ, which is something that is, a soapbox of mine. But sorry if I sound taller, I'm up on a soapbox right now. But I guess that does lead to an interesting question in the conjunction of feminism and Christianity. Are those two things compatible in your view, or does feminism necessarily preclude Christianity?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. It's a really hard one. I've thought a lot about it, but I think if you get to the heart of it, feminism is really, it's the occult, it's free love, it's smashing the patriarchy. Those are the three main elements that have been sort of the mainstays. And we can't keep any of those as Christians. None of those are compatible with the faith. Now, there are people that are going to say, well, I'm a different kind of feminist. Well, great. Then you need to be very specific about exactly what you mean by feminism, because this is where we've really confused people and tried to put the two words together. And it's really misled a lot of women into, walking them into these older ideas of feminism, but what we mean is really something else, but we're not being clear about that. So yeah, I think it can be done, but I don't think it's necessary. I think we just need new words. I think we need new language. I think that there's so much baggage with feminism that it almost just feels dated and tired, and it's just time to just let it go and start using different language, because we know that we can create new words, and we can create new ways in which people can think about these things. So I'm all for just being a lot more creative instead of allowing these old ideas with so much baggage really continue to weigh us down.
Creative Christians. I like it. I also think about men in particular, and not only because I care about men in general, but I have an awesome husband, and I'm the mother of four boys. So two awesome girls and four awesome boys. But I look at the future for them, and I think there's a lot of moms out there that have thought, oh, well, maybe these ideas sounded good to me in college about female empowerment and smash the patriarchy, and now I look in the eyes of my 2-year-old boy and I think, what future is there going to be for him when you have the climbing suicide rates for men, the dropout rates, the lack of purposeful drive, when they're being accused of toxic masculinity essentially just for existing and for displaying boy-like tendencies. And we do have now, it seems almost like it's the flip side, where the institutions are claiming to quote unquote empower women by denigrating men, by oppressing the men in some sort of warped idea of justice. And I'm looking at the future for boys and for men, and it looks a little dreary right now, to make an understatement. And I wonder if you have some advice for mothers of boys. I'll just put myself in that category. Do you have advice for me and for people that are like me, that want a wonderful future for our young girls, obviously, but also for our boys. And what kind of future can we create as a society that gives them both the opportunity that they need to be who God has designed them to be?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a huge question, and obviously is something for both parents to talk about together. I think a lot of it depends on the kinds of schools in which your children go to. I mean, we homeschool sometimes, and other times other kids are in school. So it's just a matter of picking and choosing. But I think the hard part is that this is just such a hard issue for men because they've been so silenced by it. So this is why it's just important to also have a good community, to do your best to have people, these don't have to be people that are exactly like you, but that to see the value in family and in raising your sons and daughters, and to, not crushing our boys and allowing their gifts to really flourish. So yeah, I think there's a lot of, obviously sports is an important thing. I think manual labor is a remarkable thing that we can give young men, especially if they can work under a mentor, and maybe, that great age when they'll learn something from someone else instead of their dads, or certainly their moms. But yeah, I think this is just a matter of even like looking back at old literature and reading old stories and reading good stories, reading great stories, just forming them in ways where we just don't throw our hands up and say, well, just fine, play the video games all day.
Yes.
I think we've all had those days. Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge, but I think that's also the remarkable thing is to see how much having sons really changes women a lot, because I've heard time and again women who have abandoned feminism because that suddenly they do have sons,
Hmm.
husbands that mean the world to them, and they're like, why do I hate these people? Why am I supposed to hate these people again? So there's a lot of hope in that and in those relationships. But yeah, I guess the bigger piece as ever is going to be just helping people realize that these resentments and this sort of faux justice that they think they're imposing on the culture is not helping anyone. It's harming all of us, because it's
Hmm.
harming women, it's harming their sons, it's harming our husbands, and we're all weakened by this instead of strengthened and made better.
Yeah, and I think that I am primarily focused on individual revival and responsibility. And around here on the show, we talk a lot about practical application. And I think as individuals, and I think again, returning that focus, as you mentioned, it's not just about these giant institutions, but institutions are made up of people. We're made up of families, and God designed it that way. Again, Christian talking in the room. That's where we need to return our focus, I think. But we have gotten caught up in this power dynamic, and we look at the power of platforms and the power of being able to preach to the masses through social media. And we start to look, even as Christians, as conservatives, we start to look at these kind of top-down sort of solutions. And I think individually, I'm seeing a lot of hope. Individually, I see a lot of people returning. That's kind of the new revolution, as we're seeing this traditional, a return to the good old ways of traditional, mom and dad married together, having wonderful, like half a dozen kids or more, which I call the Victorian starter kit. And and it's working for us, homeschooling or, small Christian school, whatever that might be. And I'm seeing that individually. More and more people are making those decisions for themselves and their families. And that gives me a lot of hope. I wonder if you're seeing similar hope, and what you think is the hope of the future. I do think, since I've put my cards out on the table, I think it's individual rather than looking to the institutions to save us. I think that's where all the answers lie. But it also, there are these gigantic pushes that you document in your book, and this long train of abuses that has led us to this point. Can that really just be dismantled by the honest, hardworking mom and dad that remain faithful and grow their children up in, the nurture and admonition of the Lord, in humility and in confidence? Is that enough to topple the lies of feminism?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's enough or not, but I think that's really the right way to go. I think it really does come back to restoring the family, restoring a sense of patriarchy. All the things that have been undone, we need to redo, restoring God to the center of our lives. These are all the keys. And this is why, we can see that these are powerful, because this is what they've been fighting against for so long. This has been the main thing that every ideology has tried to get rid of and destroy. So, yeah, I think that's probably the best thing that we can do, is just to start building out in that way. I'm also, I have to say, really encouraged by a lot of these mom groups that I'm seeing. Because one of the things that I've marveled at is just how isolated most of us are. We feel like we're more like the only one who does this or thinks this way. Because again, we don't have a national, we have very few celebrities that we can identify with. There's no magazine that we can look through where we're like, oh, I identify with her. Like there's not that national sense. And I think because of that, a lot of us have just felt like we have to be quiet and we have to, maybe we're wrong. And, there's kind of some shame in it or something. But I think that is what you're talking about is sort of what's changing. People are beginning to realize, what I call in the book, the flyover women. Even if you're not in flyover country, you still have that experience of being kind of ignored and thought as unimportant and insignificant. So I feel like that's changing with like Moms for Liberty, Moms for America, these different groups that are allowing women to have some kind of platform and be involved either in politics or more engaged in their home or, all kinds of things. So it does feel like there is some hope out of there. And of course, we know, God's grace is going to abound where sin abounds. And, we can place great hope in him leading us and guiding us and showing us the direction into which we need to be going. But I think there's also that key of, just praying for those who are so far from him, because they're not the real enemy. We know who the real enemy is, and it's not them. And that's obviously the hard part to parse out too, is just, how much we win people over with our kindness and tenderness and understanding and being mindful of that in all of our relationships too.
The name Rosaria Butterfield comes to mind. That's really her story.
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely love her. And you've been so generous with your time. I wonder if you permit one last question, since we're in the realm of politics. What are some of the political remedies to some of this? Because this isn't just being pushed by, again, the blue-haired college professors in blue states. It's now coming from the top down in the most powerful chambers and influencers in the world. They're all parroting these same lies. Is there a way to fight back at the policy level? We obviously, given and being undergirded by the grassroots efforts of individuals and families.
The only area that I've really spent time thinking about this specifically, other than, individual campaigns, is looking at the women's vote. This fascinates me because every election we hear about the women's vote and we hear how much women broke for the left again. They broke for the left again, and, over and over and over again. But there's never any sense of like, oh, this is how we're going to shore up the women's vote. It's just always left like crickets. Like it's almost like the bad news bears or something. They just give up. Like, we don't know how to handle it or cure this, so we'll just report on it and then like we won't touch it. So again, not to be too repetitive, but I think that, Moms for Liberty is doing a great job in this area. And I think just being even more outspoken about it and allowing other women to feel like there's a chance that their vote could make a difference, or even their relationships could make a difference, that they could start talking about these things with other moms. Those are really important things. And, I look back at Phyllis Schlafly and what she was able to do with the Eagle Forum. It's amazing what they did to stop the Equal Rights Amendment. And I think that just feels like a wild card. And it's, one of the reasons why parents and moms are being targeted by the Department of Justice and whatnot, because they know that. They know that these are fierce women who are fighting for these things. So I really think that we need to just start helping women figure out, how do we shore this up? How do we stop the women's vote from always breaking the way that it has in the past? So that's something that feels like it's worth looking into and spending some time actually analyzing instead of just reporting on it and letting it go the way it's always gone.
You're right. I think conservatives have largely given up on some of that, but I don't think that we should. And I think the women who are strong in their faith, women who understand the beauty of being women, just being willing to speak that out loud. If we're willing to just stand up and tell the truth, and motivated by our kids, our own survival, and also a better future for ourselves, a better future for our sons and daughters. That's where I see hope, and I'm excited to see about that future.
And, I think that's one of the biggest things that in my mind, by writing this book, I realized how shallow the arguments are that are being made out there. It's, you've either got the academic jargon that's so thick you can't even get through a sentence from someone like Judith Butler, or you've got things like Gloria Steinem has said that I feel like this is where Kamala Harris gets a lot of her ideas. Like they are so out there and so shallow and silly that they're just ridiculous, but they're not fact checked. And I think that when you start realizing how shallow, the ideas are, it becomes very easy to dismantle it and to start working against it. And I think that's kind of the exciting thing, is just being able to equip women with this realization that this is not really an intellectual Goliath. This is just big because a lot of people believe it, but it's not because it's some juggernaut that we can't take down. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's sort of the emperor has no clothes. And so I would really encourage people to not be afraid of the arguments, because they're just not that great.
And you've done a lot of that work. Thank you for us in The End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. I'm excited about the impact that I think this book will have, as well as your great other works as well. And I'd love to discuss the theology of home sometime with you as well. Carrie, it's been phenomenal to have you. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This has been really fun.
The End of Woman, check it out. I'll link it below in our podcast as well. So if you're listening on the air, be sure to check out the podcast notes afterward and post it on our Facebook page, which is Faith Works Live. We'll be live on YouTube. Marvelous to hear the fruits of the great minds like Carrie's, but also to know that we're not on the wrong side of history here. The fact that we are here in the first place is, I think, a testament to men and women working well together, and that there's a reason for that. God designed us so well. And if we go back to the original design that glorifies him and is so good for us, it's for our flourishing too. And yes, as sinful human beings, we mess it up, but we can find ways, and in particular being redeemed by his own son in Jesus Christ, that nothing is impossible with God. And I think that there is a great hope for our future. That is where my hope is. Thanks so much for tuning in. Our mission is to love God, serve others, and live free. Thanks for being a part of Faith Works Live.